Hey guys, I'm Tyler. Today we're going to make these jigs so we can sharpen our planer and our jointer knives. I do want to preface this build that these are not my design. A dude named Deulen, I think, is the one who came up with these, and I found several different plans for these on Lumberjacks and various different websites like that. The whole point of this jig is so that you can take your jointer and planer knives, drop them into the jig, which holds them at the correct angle, and then use a sanding board like this with various different grits of sandpaper on it to sharpen your blades. Before we get into this build, if you guys wouldn't mind hitting that subscribe button so that you never miss a new episode. I'm going to make these jigs out of hickory. To get started, I'm going to take some rough sawn hickory and take it to the bandsaw, jointer, and planer and clamp it all together. Once it is dried sufficiently, I'm going to take it out of the clamps, back to the jointer and planer, and square it up again. Now I'm going to take it to the table saw, cut it to its proper dimensions, tilt the blade to 45 degrees, and cut out the handles and the grooves to hold the blades. When I cut the grooves in my jig to hold the blades, I cut them at a ½ inch of total depth. This was a little bit too much. The blades barely stuck out of the jig, so I would recommend about 3/8 of an inch of total depth. I made my jig for the planer blades and jointer blades in one piece, so now I am cutting it to the proper length for both of those blades on the chop saw. And mark out for appropriate screw placement, allowing for even pressure while holding the blades in place. I drilled and tapped these holes to accept a 1032 panhead Phillips machine screw. Going back, it might have been a better idea to use Allen heads as the machine screws have already started to strip out a little bit, but really, I've got a ton of these machine screws so I can easily replace them. I added a couple coats of natural Danish oil for some protection. I had big plans to use some leftover mirrored glass from my walnut jewelry box build. I started off real strong, the first cut went real well, but the second cut, not so much. I broke it in such a way that there was some pieces that I needed to try to crack off, and when I tried to crack these little pieces off, I ended up cracking the whole entire plate. So I ended up getting a new piece of glass cut to the proper dimensions and using that instead. To hold the glass onto the MDF sanding board, I used a thin layer of polyurethane construction adhesive. You need to make very sure that this glass stays perfectly flat, so I used a planer blade and tried to rock it on the glass to find any high spots. I did have to add some construction adhesive in certain areas to make it perfectly flat. Then I sanded the outside of the glass down a little bit to prevent any cutting and added my grits of sandpaper. These yellow sheets are available in a kit at your local woodworking store, but I wanted to go a little bit higher with the grits and went to 4,000, but I had to add this adhesive on my own. I discovered that my jointer blades are a little bit thicker than the planer blades, so I had to add a second groove using the table saw. If I made it again, I would make the jointer and planer jigs at the same time, but add the widened groove for the jointer jig earlier on. Tested everything out, and boy did it work great. The blades cut like butter now. I will link to a video where I show you specifically how to use these jigs when I have that video produced. You can see here how there's much less tear out in the board on the right compared to the left, which is the jig that I cut with the dull blades. And that's hickory, very, very hard. You can see the walnut was cut perfectly. Well, I am super impressed with the results from this jig. I sharpened my jointer blades, and what a huge difference as I pushed a piece of hickory through that jointer. Couple things I might change. I'm not totally sold on the machine head screws. I did that because I know I always have a Phillips head in my belt and not an Allen head, but they're already starting to strip out a little bit. I guess if they do, I got plenty more screws, I can just replace it. Also, a little warning, when you're setting the glass for this, you need to be very, very careful that it's perfectly flat. I used a brand new planer blade and make sure it didn't have any bounce in it when I was setting the glass on this. Not sure if I would use the construction adhesive again because it's pretty thick when you're trying to set the glass, but I'm not sure if something like a spray adhesive would work well enough. Hope you guys enjoyed this build. If you did, please hammer that thumbs up button, it helps us out a ton, and please subscribe if you already haven't. I'm DIYTyler. You guys have a good one. And then use a sanding board like this with and then use a sanding board like this with this with very